So, Thomas, I think a lot of account managers and a lot of salespeople out there, as time goes on, they're wondering about cold calling and whether it's effective anymore or not. I think a lot of people are filtering phone calls, not really paying a lot of attention to them, and they might get the idea that cold calling is just completely ineffective. You make lots of cold calls each day. Is it working? Is it completely
Yeah, I mean,
ineffective?
I keep doing it, so I hope it's still working. I mean, the short answer is yeah, it still is effective. It really depends on the kinds of accounts that you're going after, the kinds of prospects, the sorts of campaigns. For my purposes, like reaching out to marketing agencies,
Hmm.
it's working fantastically. That means I've got to be making about 50 to 100 calls a day to get the answer rate up high enough that I can actually have those kinds of conversations that lead to demos booked. But yeah,
Hmm.
the short answer is it is working. It still works, whether it's 2021, 2022. Going forward, I don't see this changing too much, but it's definitely a sort of a perennial concern that gets talked about a lot.
I'd imagine the success rate varies quite a bit based on a couple of different factors as well, right? Like just the ability to connect to people probably varies based on the list and how good it is.
Mhm.
A lot of companies are using database and list providers to pull these lists of people to call, and if that is old data, you're not going to make a connection, or that person's already moved on. Some industries are
Mhm.
really bad for that. In some industries, the average shelf life of an employee is like a year, and then they move to another company. So if your data is a year out of date, you've got a good chance of calling someone who doesn't work at that company anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I always put a lot of work in before the call happens to make sure those folks are still at the company, that I'm reaching out to the right person. And,
Hmm.
in the event that it happens, you reach out, someone's not there any longer. You've got a name that's just entirely wrong. You're not sure why. You've got to be careful with those sort of aggregated lists for that reason.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
when it does happen, you just need to be smart and sort of pivot on your feet, and have the confidence going in, knowing that what you're pitching or what you're asking about is valid and can be used to the benefit of that company. So that's more on the methodology of how to actually make that call. But at the end of the day, people still are picking up the phones.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like we're talking about businesses that we're calling into, right? We're doing B2B,
Hmm.
not B2C, where we're calling in
Yeah.
consumers. I'd imagine that makes a bit of a difference. And I mean, when you're dialing, so if you dial like 100 dials in a day, how often do you connect with the business, and then how often do you connect with like an actual decision maker per day?
Yeah, typically with the business, you're going to get a gatekeeper
Hmm.
every call. Whether that gatekeeper is actually employed directly by the company or it is a third party call answering service, you're going to have a conversation, and you use that to your advantage. Inquire, right? Be inquisitive, be a little bit curious, maybe even play dumb. Just say, hey, can you help me out? I'm just trying to look for so and so,
Hmm.
and get a sense of how the company is actually organized and structured from the inside. um, and in terms of decision makers, that number is a little lower, right? It might be a 1 in 10. You actually get the decision maker on the phone.
Hmm.
Yeah, it just depends on the industry, right? That we're dealing with. Like you said, we're doing business to business. So,
Yeah.
my conversation rate with decision makers in the insurance industry or in investment capital varies differently compared to marketing agencies. So,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it'll vary based on that. Okay, so I mean, uh, uh, when you do get them on the phone, how do you find it varies? Because like I think SDRs and BDRs, they have all these channels in front of them.
mhm.
They have like calling, like, and the old school way is like you burn up the lines, so you just call, call, call. There's emailing, there's social. How do you find just calling compares against those?
Yeah. So honestly, I prefer calling for one reason, which is that the sort of immediacy of the human voice takes precedence over, I think, texts and social messaging. Um, the sort of advantage to the spoken word over the written word goes back to like Socrates. We've got 25 years of arguments in this favor. But the reality of it on the ground is that it's a lot easier dismiss or simply ignore an email, a text outreach by social, right? Whether that's LinkedIn or through
Hmm.
some other means, we can quite easily dismiss and ignore those. But when you get someone on the phone, they actually have to respond, right? That response might be a rejection, it might be a maybe, it might be a yes, but whatever it is, they have to at least give some kind of a response. And that's something that you get with a phone call. So you
They
make the
can't just
call.
delete the phone call and move on.
Exactly. Yeah. They have to be responsible to the fact that there's another human on the line. You're there with them.
So, Thomas, one of the things that I think a lot of people are thinking about, especially right now, is everyone's call screening. How do you actually make a connection with? How do you actually get someone on the phone when you're calling from like an unknown number or a company that they haven't heard of before?
hmm Yeah. So one way to go about it is, again, leverage those gatekeepers. So if you're calling into a business, give them as much information as you possibly can in that call. Ask informed questions, and that will
Hmm.
increase the rate that a decision maker will pick up your number when you actually do get a hold of them. Another fun way is sending a text before you call. Something as simple as, "Hey, um, I'm, I'm Thomas from Active Demand. I'm just going to reach out to you by phone in a couple minutes. How does
Hmm.
that sound?" Right? At least, you know they'll see your number come in. They'll see the text. They'll read it. If they don't respond to the text right away, that's fine. At least they'll recognize the number and they might actually pick up the phone. This is especially or only effective if you have cell phone numbers, of course.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I would say that's probably one of the few ways you can actually get someone to pick up the phone on a cell phone. Like, I don't know about you, but I screen most of the calls that I can. You're probably in
Yeah,
the same
but
same boat.
the text after or before is interesting. Yeah, before would prep the person on the other end. Even if they don't reply, what it might be is, okay, begrudgingly, I guess this call's coming. And
Yeah.
if they get the call, then they can at least say, okay, well, I don't think we're like they might have a little bit of thought like prepared for it.
hmm
Um which might be good or might be bad. They might be thinking of objections to throw at you, or they might be thinking of,
hmm
do I actually need that? Or like, and that would be a good thing because that at least they would be like inquisitive and thinking about it. So yeah, at least you're more likely to get an answer. And I
Yeah.
think that's
You're
the one thing we're trying to do is not just get a delete, but get a thinking and then get an answer on it.
You're setting the expectation, and it falls back into permission based selling, which is asking permission to proceed. So
Hmm.
you're saying, "Hey, I'm going to call you in 2 minutes. How does that sound?" At least asking that question um, sets up the terms for them to reject you right then and there.
Hmm.
And if they just don't respond at all, you give them that call. At least they know it's coming. So,
Yeah, and they recognize the phone number
hmm
because it's the texting that just came in.
hmm
Now, I think in the olden days, they would have just given like they would have given a person a sheet of like names and phone numbers, and you'd call them and you'd strike them out as after, or you'd put like a little check. Yeah, I've made one call. Now I'm gonna make another
hmm
call. Now I'm gonna strike them out. I've called that person enough times. How would you order your calls in your sequence, and what other channels would you try?
Yeah. So typically, I like to make a phone call first before an email goes out. So in
Hmm.
my sequence, it's going to be a phone call, a voicemail, an email, then another follow up call, voicemail, email. And depending on the campaign, there might also be social outreach in there. So LinkedIn is useful for that. That LinkedIn outreach is going to be nestled typically either before the call or somewhere after the first call.
Hmm.
And you can also be used in place of email. I mean, if you're not getting any demos booked by email and LinkedIn's working, then by all means, go right ahead. Another useful thing with something like LinkedIn or just other social outreach in general is, in the same way that we send a text before a call, you can kind of set up an expectation, right? You can reach out on LinkedIn to a prospect and say, "Hey, I want to speak to you about this. I have this kind of
Hmm.
question or this kind of product. How does a call sound?" Right? And you can actually get permission there to call them as well as their direct number, which is more useful than going through a call system, talking to a bunch of gatekeepers, and then finally getting routed correctly.
Yeah, I find I'm on the receiving end a lot because I'm a VP of marketing sales, so I have a lot of
hmm
people trying to like beat the door down and get my attention. And I notice like the people who do the full court press, they call, they email, they're adding me on LinkedIn, like they're doing all of these things. I know that they're not gonna give up. I know that I have to give them a response. So there's that persistence and that, like, motivation that they're
Mhm.
demonstrating with that. So at the very least, I have to pay them a little bit of attention and say, "I'm not interested," or "I am interested," or "Send me a quote," or something. So, I do, as gamers recognize game, I do appreciate when when other people trying to sell to me, are doing that full court press.